Little girl finds $10 million hidden behind a wall, but her request leaves the billionaire CEO speechless. Before the story starts, subscribe and comment where you're watching from. This one will touch your heart. The alarm clock never rang because there wasn't one. Madison Parker woke up as she always did, when the hunger pangs in her tiny stomach became too sharp to ignore. At 5 years old, she had learned that mornings meant waiting to see if Mommy had found any food the night before, waiting to know if today would be a eating day or a surviving day. "Mommy?" Madison whispered, padding barefoot across the cold linoleum floor of their studio apartment. Her voice echoed in the sparse room that held everything they owned: a mattress on the floor, a broken chair, and a cardboard box that served as their dinner table. Rebecca Parker sat hunched over a pile of bills at the makeshift table, her auburn hair falling like a curtain around her face. At 28, she looked a decade older. The fluorescent light from the hallway seeped through the gaps in their door, casting harsh shadows across her hollow cheeks. "Morning, baby," Rebecca forced a smile, quickly shuffling the overdue notices behind her back. "Did you sleep well?" Madison nodded, but her eyes were already scanning the empty counters. "Is there breakfast today?" The question that broke Rebecca's heart every single morning. She pulled Madison onto her lap, breathing in the sweet scent of her daughter's hair, one of the few things in this world that still smelled of innocence. "Well," Rebecca said, her voice carefully cheerful, "I have some crackers left from yesterday." She reached behind the cardboard box and produced 3 saltines, slightly stale but precious as gold. "And look what I found!" She pulled out a small packet of jam she'd taken from the diner where she worked her second job. "It's strawberry, your favorite." Madison's face lit up with genuine joy. At 5, 3 crackers with jam felt like a feast when love seasoned every bite. "Can we share it, Mommy?" "No, sweetheart, that's all for you. Mommy already ate." The lie came so easily now. Rebecca had perfected the art of pretending she wasn't hungry, pretending the electricity wouldn't be shut off next week, pretending that everything would be okay. As Madison carefully spread the jam on each cracker, making them last as long as possible, Rebecca's mind raced through her impossible mathematics. Rent was due in 5 days, $800. She had $23 in her purse and $150 in tips from the diner hidden in an old coffee can. Her third job, cleaning offices, paid weekly, but that was only $200, and half of it would go to the babysitter who watched Madison while she worked nights. "Mommy, why do you look sad?" Madison asked, jam sticky on her fingers. "I'm not sad, baby. I'm just thinking about what a beautiful day it's going to be." Rebecca kissed the top of Madison's head. "You know what? After I come home from work tonight, maybe we can take a walk through Millbrook Heights. Would you like that?" Millbrook Heights, the wealthy neighborhood where Rebecca cleaned offices in gleaming buildings, where people threw away more food in a day than Rebecca could afford in a week. Madison had only seen it once, but she remembered the big houses with their perfect lawns and the way everything seemed to sparkle. The place with the pretty houses. Madison's eyes widened. That's right, the pretty houses where people are very, very lucky. What Rebecca didn't say was that walking through Millbrook Heights was free, and sometimes, if they were very careful and very quiet, they could find treasures in the garbage cans. Day-old bread from expensive bakeries, barely bruised fruit, sometimes even unopened containers of yogurt that were just past their sell-by date. The shame of it burned in Rebecca's throat, but Madison's survival came before pride. By 7 a.m., Rebecca was rushing to her first job at Murphy's Auto Shop, where she answered phones and filed paperwork for $12 an hour. Madison went to Mrs. Chen next door, who watched her for free in exchange for Rebecca helping with grocery shopping on weekends. Mrs. Chen was 73 and kind, but she had her own struggles with a fixed income. "Be good for Mrs. Chen," Rebecca whispered, hugging Madison tight. "And remember, if anyone asks, you tell them Mommy loves you more than all the stars in the sky." "More than all the stars in the sky," Madison repeated solemnly. It was their daily ritual, their promise to each other. As Rebecca hurried down the stairs of their building, her shoes worn so thin she could feel every crack in the sidewalk, she didn't notice the black sedan parked across the street. Didn't see the driver taking notes about her schedule. Didn't realize that someone had been watching their building for weeks. In Millbrook Heights, 12 miles away, William Harrison stood in his marble bathroom, adjusting a tie that cost more than Rebecca made in a month. At 35, he was the youngest CEO in the history of Harrison Industries, an empire built on real estate development that had transformed 3 cities and made him a billionaire before his 40th birthday. His reflection stared back from the gold-framed mirror. Sharp jawline, steel-grey eyes, dark hair perfectly styled. Everything about William Harrison projected power and control. His suits were handmade in Italy, his watch was a limited edition Patek Philippe, and his mansion sat on 5 acres of perfectly manicured grounds. But this morning, something felt different. Wrong. William's phone buzzed, a text from his head of security. "Package delivery confirmed for tonight. Timeline unchanged." The message should have brought relief. After months of planning, everything was finally in motion. The $10 million in cash had been moved to the secure location, and by tomorrow morning, this particular problem would be solved forever. The evidence would disappear, the witnesses would be silent, and his empire would remain untouchable. Yet as William walked through his mansion, past the dining room that could seat 20, past the living room with its priceless art collection, past the library filled with first-edition books he'd never read, something gnawed at him. Maybe it was the dream he'd had again, the same dream that had haunted him for 3 months. In the dream, he was a child again, hungry and afraid, hiding in a closet while his father raged through their trailer home. Before the money, before the power, before he'd built walls so high that nothing could hurt him. "Mr. Harrison?" "Mrs." Abbott, his housekeeper, appeared in the hallway. She was a kind woman in her 60s who'd worked for the family for 15 years. "Will you be dining at home tonight?" "No," William said curtly, shaking off the memory. "I have a business dinner." Another lie. He had no dinner plans, but tonight he would be busy burying the past forever. As William climbed into his Bentley, he had no idea that in just 12 hours, a 5-year-old girl named Madison would walk into his life and change everything he thought he knew about power, money, and what it truly meant to be wealthy. The morning sun rose over Millbrook, casting long shadows that stretched between 2 worlds, the desperate poverty of East Side and the gleaming wealth of the Heights. 2 worlds that were about to collide in the most unexpected way. But first, Madison had to survive another day. By 3 p.m., Madison's stomach was making the rumbling sounds that meant serious business. Mrs. Chen had shared her lunch of rice and vegetables, but at 5 years old, Madison's body was growing fast, and one small meal wasn't enough to fuel her endless energy. "Mrs. Chen," Madison said, tugging on the elderly woman's sweater, "my tummy is making the hungry noise again." Mrs. Chen looked down at the little girl with sad eyes. She understood hunger, had lived through it in her homeland many decades ago. Her own pantry was nearly bare until her Social Security check arrived next week. "Oh, little bird, Mrs. Chen said softly in her accented English, "maybe we take walk today. Fresh air good for growing girls." Madison perked up immediately. Walks were adventures, especially when they ventured beyond their neighborhood. "Can we go see the pretty houses again?" Mrs. Chen hesitated. She knew what Rebecca thought about Madison's occasional expeditions to find food, but she also knew that sometimes survival required swallowing pride. "We walk little bit, But you stay close to Mrs. Chen, yes? Hand in hand, they made their way through the maze of streets that separated East Side from Millbrook Heights. The transformation was gradual but dramatic. Broken sidewalks gave way to pristine walkways, graffitied walls became manicured hedges, and the sound of traffic was replaced by the gentle hum of expensive cars. Madison's eyes grew wide as they entered the Heights. Even Mrs. Chen, who had seen these houses before, felt small among the towering mansions. "Rich people live here," Madison whispered, as if speaking too loudly might break some magic spell. "Yes, little bird, very rich people." They walked slowly, Madison marveling at the perfect lawns and fancy cars. Some houses had gates with actual guards. Others had fountains in their front yards that were bigger than Madison's entire apartment. "Mrs. Chen, why do some people have so much, and we have so little?" It was the kind of question that had no easy answer. Mrs. Chen stopped walking and knelt down to Madison's level. "Sometimes life not fair, little bird. But having little money not mean having little love. Your mama love you very much." "I know," Madison said matter-of-factly. "Mommy loves me more than all the stars in the sky." As they continued walking, Madison's sharp, 5-year-old eyes spotted something the adults missed. Near the garbage bins behind one of the smaller mansions, she saw movement, a flash of grey fur. "Mrs. Chen, look!" Madison pointed excitedly. "A kitty!" Sure enough, a thin grey cat was pawing through some scattered garbage, clearly searching for food. Madison's heart immediately went out to the animal. Here was someone else who was hungry, just like her. "Poor kitty," Madison said, breaking away from Mrs. Chen and approaching slowly. "Are you hungry too?" The cat looked up, wary but not aggressive. It was young, maybe 6 months old, with bright green eyes and a coat that would have been beautiful if not matted with dirt. "Madison, no!" Mrs. Chen called, but the little girl was already kneeling beside the cat, her small hand extended. "It's okay, kitty. I'm hungry too. Maybe we can be hungry friends." Something about Madison's gentle voice and slow movements calmed the cat. It allowed her to pet its head, purring softly despite its obvious distress. "Mrs. Chen, the kitty is so skinny. Just like me sometimes." The simple truth of it hit Mrs. Chen like a physical blow. This beautiful, innocent child saw herself in a stray cat because they shared the same struggle, the constant search for enough food to survive. "Little bird," Mrs. Chen said gently, "we need to go home soon. Your mama be worried." "But what about the kitty?" Madison looked up with those enormous brown eyes that could melt stone. "We can't just leave it here. What if it gets more hungry?" Mrs. Chen was about to explain why they couldn't help every hungry creature they met when Madison's attention was caught by something else entirely. "Mrs. Chen," Madison whispered, her voice filled with awe, "look at that house." She was pointing at the largest mansion on the street, a sprawling estate with white columns, multiple balconies, and grounds that seemed to stretch forever. Even among the wealthy homes of Millbrook Heights, this one stood out like a palace. "That Harrison house," Mrs. Chen said. "Very important man lived there, very rich man." "Harrison," Madison repeated the name carefully. "He must have lots of food." Mrs. Chen felt a chill of worry. She knew that look in Madison's eyes, the same look she got when she was planning one of her innocent but dangerous adventures. "Madison, no, we no bother rich people. They not like us." But Madison was already studying the house with the intense focus she usually reserved for picture books. She noticed that there were no guards at this gate, unlike some of the other houses. She saw that the garbage bins were closer to the street. And most importantly, she spotted what looked like a small opening in the hedge that surrounded the property. "I could just ask nicely," Madison said thoughtfully. "Mommy says rich people sometimes give money to hungry people. Maybe they give food too." Madison! Mrs. Chen's voice was sharp now. We go home, now! But as they walked away, Madison kept looking back at the Harrison mansion. Something about it called to her. Maybe it was the warm lights in the windows, or the way the house seemed less scary than the others, with their high walls and sharp fences. That evening, when Rebecca came home exhausted from her second job, she found Madison unusually quiet. Usually her daughter would greet her with a flurry of stories about her day with Mrs. Chen. Tonight, Madison just hugged her extra tight. "How was your day, baby?" Rebecca asked, settling onto their mattress with Madison curled against her side. "Mrs. Chen and I saw the pretty houses again," Madison said carefully, "and I met a hungry kitty." Rebecca's heart clenched. She knew Madison identified with stray animals because she understood their struggle. That must have been nice, seeing the kitty. "Mommy," Madison said, her voice very small, "do you think rich people ever share their food?" The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything Rebecca believed about the world. She'd worked for rich people, cleaned their offices, seen how they lived. In her experience, the wealthy saw people like her and Madison as invisible, useful for labor, but not deserving of genuine compassion. "Some people share," Rebecca said carefully. "But we can't count on it, baby. We have to take care of ourselves." "But what if they knew how hungry we get sometimes? What if they knew that sometimes there's no breakfast and no dinner and my tummy hurts all night?" Rebecca felt tears burning behind her eyes. She pulled Madison closer, breathing in her innocence. "Oh, sweetheart, things are going to get better. Mommy's working very hard to make sure you always have enough food." It was another promise she wasn't sure she could keep, but love made her voice steady and sure. As Madison drifted off to sleep in her mother's arms, she dreamed of the grey cat and the big white house. In her dream, the man who lived in the Harrison mansion had kind eyes and a warm smile, and he gave food to everyone who was hungry, cats and little girls and tired mamas who worked 3 jobs just to pay rent. It was a beautiful dream, but tomorrow Madison would discover that reality was far more complicated than any 5-year-old could imagine. And tomorrow, her hunger would lead her to make a choice that would change everything. Thursday morning arrived grey and drizzling, the kind of weather that made everything feel harder. Madison woke to find their small apartment colder than usual. Rebecca had kept the heat off overnight to save money, and now frost was forming on the inside of their single window. "Mommy," Madison whispered, but Rebecca was already gone. A note on the cardboard box table, written in Rebecca's careful handwriting, explained that she'd been called in early for her auto shop job. Someone had called in sick, and she couldn't afford to say no to extra hours. Mrs. Chen arrived 20 minutes later, letting herself in with the spare key Rebecca had given her. She found Madison sitting on the mattress, wrapped in their only blanket, staring at the empty space where breakfast should have been. "Morning, little bird," Mrs. Chen said gently. "Your mama have to work early today." Madison nodded. "She left crackers, but—" She pointed to the counter where a few broken saltines sat in a small pile. Even to a 5-year-old, it was obviously not enough food for a whole day. Mrs. Chen's own stomach clenched with sympathy. Her Social Security check wasn't due for 3 more days, and her own pantry held only instant noodles and tea. She'd been stretching 1 packet of noodles across 2 days, and her body was feeling the strain. "We share my noodles today," Mrs. Chen said, but Madison shook her head. "You need to eat too, Mrs. Chen. Grown-ups get hungry just like kids." The wisdom in those words coming from such a small child nearly brought tears to Mrs. Chen's eyes. At 5 years old, Madison already understood sacrifice in a way that many adults never would. They split the crackers and a cup of weak tea, and Mrs. Chen tried to distract Madison with stories about her childhood in China. But by noon, both of them were fighting serious hunger pangs, and Madison's energy was flagging in a way that worried the elderly woman. "Little bird," Mrs. Chen said carefully, "maybe we take another walk today? Get some fresh air." Madison's eyes brightened immediately. "To see the pretty houses." Mrs. Chen hesitated. Yesterday's walk had ended with Madison asking too many questions about rich people and sharing food. But looking at the little girl's pale face and the dark circles under her eyes, Mrs. Chen realized they needed to do something. Madison needed food, and pride was a luxury they couldn't afford. "Maybe little walk," Mrs. Chen agreed, "but you must promise. Stay very close to Mrs. Chen. No running away." "I promise," Madison said solemnly, though her fingers were already crossed behind her back. The walk to Millbrook Heights took longer today. Mrs. Chen moved slowly, her own hunger making her dizzy, and Madison's usual boundless energy was subdued. But as they entered the wealthy neighborhood, Madison's spirits lifted. "Look, Mrs. Chen, the kitty!" Sure enough, the grey cat was back near the Harrison mansion, this time sitting by the ornate front gate as if waiting for someone. It looked even thinner than yesterday, its ribs showing through its matted fur. "Poor little kitty," Madison said, approaching slowly. The cat recognized her and came forward, rubbing against her legs with desperate affection. "You're still hungry, aren't you?" Mrs. Chen watched nervously as Madison knelt beside the cat. She had a bad feeling about this day, though she couldn't pinpoint why. Maybe it was the way the mansion loomed above them, or the fact that there seemed to be more cars than usual in the circular driveway. "Madison, we look at houses from sidewalk only. We no-go on rich people property." But Madison was studying the mansion with the same intense focus as yesterday. Today, she noticed new details: a side gate that was slightly ajar, windows that were open despite the cold weather, and the sound of voices coming from inside the house. "Mrs. Chen," Madison said thoughtfully, "if someone was very hungry and they asked very nicely, don't you think a person with a big house might have some extra food?" "Little bird, rich people not always nice to poor people. Sometimes they call police. Sometimes they get angry." Madison considered this seriously. But what if they're good rich people? What if they're the kind who help hungry kitties and hungry little girls? Before Mrs. Chen could answer, Madison was already walking toward the side gate, drawn by something she couldn't quite name. The cat followed her, as if sensing that this small human might be their only hope. "Madison, come back!" Mrs. Chen called, but her voice was weak from hunger and age. Madison pushed through the slightly opened gate and found herself in a service area behind the mansion, a place where delivery trucks came and staff took breaks. The area was hidden from the main house by tall hedges, and Madison felt invisible and safe, and that's when she saw it. A section of the brick wall that looked different from the rest, newer somehow, though she couldn't have explained why. The bricks were slightly different in color, and there was a gap at the bottom where the mortar had cracked. Madison's 5-year-old curiosity took over. She knelt down and peered through the gap, and her eyes widened in amazement. Behind the false wall was a hollow space, and in that space were several large canvas bags. Even from her limited view, Madison could see that the bags were filled with something important. They were tied tightly with thick rope and labeled with numbers she couldn't read. "What's in there, kitty?" Madison whispered to the grey cat, who had followed her through the gate. With the determination that only a hungry 5-year-old could muster, Madison began working at the loose bricks. They were heavier than she expected, but hunger had given her strength, and within minutes she had created an opening just big enough to squeeze through. The space behind the wall was bigger than she'd imagined, almost like a small room. And the bags. There were 6 of them, each one larger than Madison herself. With trembling fingers, Madison untied the rope on the nearest bag. When it fell open, her mouth dropped in amazement. Money, more money than she had ever seen in her entire short life. Stacks and stacks of bills, all green, all crisp, all real. Some of the stacks were held together with rubber bands, and there were numbers written on paper bands that she couldn't read, but somehow knew were important. Madison sat back on her heels, overwhelmed. This was more money than Mommy made in a whole year. More money than existed in Madison's understanding of the world. This was enough money to buy food for every day for the rest of her life. Enough money to pay rent and buy heat and maybe even get new shoes that didn't have holes in them. But as she stared at the incredible treasure, Madison felt confused rather than excited. Where were the food scraps? Where were the leftovers from rich people dinners? She had come looking for something to eat, and instead she had found something she didn't understand. The sound of footsteps on gravel made her freeze. Someone was coming. Madison quickly crawled out of the hiding space, her heart pounding. She could hear voices getting closer, adult voices, serious and official sounding. Delivery confirmed for tonight. Everything needs to be moved by morning. 20 years of evidence and it all disappears. No one can ever know about the Riverside Project. Madison didn't understand the words, but she recognized the tone. These were the kind of adult conversations that meant serious business, the kind that made children invisible and small. But she also recognized something else. One of the voices belonged to the man who lived in this house. The rich man, Mrs. Chen, had called Harrison. And in that moment, Madison made a decision that would change everything. Instead of running away, instead of hiding, instead of pretending she hadn't seen anything, Madison Parker, 5 years old, hungry and innocent, decided to do what she had been taught was always right. She decided to tell the truth. Walking around the hedge, still carrying the grey cat who seemed to trust her completely, Madison approached the main entrance of the Harrison mansion. Her small fist knocked on the enormous wooden door with determination that belied her size. When the door opened, Madison looked up at the most powerful man in Millbrook Heights and spoke the words that would haunt William Harrison for the rest of his life. "Excuse me, sir? I found something in your backyard, and I think you should know about it." William Harrison was not accustomed to being interrupted, especially not when he was in the middle of coordinating the most sensitive operation of his career. But when Mrs. Abbott opened the front door and he heard a small, sweet voice asking about something found in his backyard, every muscle in his body tensed with dread. "Mr. Harrison?" Mrs. Abbott called from the foyer, her voice uncertain. "There's a little girl here who says she needs to speak with you about something urgent in your backyard." William's first instinct was to have security remove the child immediately. His head of security, Marcus Webb, was in the study going over final details of tonight's evidence disposal. In 6 hours, every trace of his father's legacy would be erased forever. The $10 million in bribe money, funds that had been hidden for over 2 decades, would disappear along with documents that could destroy the Harrison family name. But something in the child's innocent tone made him pause. Against every instinct screaming danger, William walked to the front door. The sight that greeted him was utterly unexpected. A tiny girl, no more than 5 years old, stood on his marble steps, holding a scraggly grey cat. Her clothes were clean, but obviously second-hand. Jeans with carefully mended patches, a sweater several sizes too large, sneakers held together with tape. But her eyes were extraordinary, large, brown, and filled with the kind of pure honesty that William hadn't encountered in his adult life. "Are you the man who lives in this big house?" Madison asked, looking up at him without the slightest trace of intimidation. "I am," William said carefully, his voice automatically shifting to the gentle tone he reserved for children at charity events. "What's your name, little one?" "I'm Madison Parker, and this is my friend," she said, indicating the cat. "We don't know his name yet, but he's very hungry, just like me sometimes." The matter-of-fact way she spoke about hunger hit William unexpectedly. This child discussed poverty the way other children talked about playground games, as a simple reality of her world. "Madison," William said, kneeling to her level to avoid appearing intimidating, "what did you want to tell me about my backyard?" Madison's expression grew serious, as if she were about to share something very important. "Well, sir, I was looking for food scraps because me and Mrs. Chen didn't have lunch today, and I found a place where your wall looked different from the rest." William's heart rate spiked dangerously. The hidden compartment, the money, 23 years of carefully concealed family secrets, and a 5-year-old had stumbled onto them while searching for garbage to eat. "I squeezed through a loose board in your fence first," Madison continued, explaining how she'd accessed his property, "and then I saw where some old bricks had fallen away from the wall. There was a big space behind them." That explained it. The recent storm had damaged the perimeter fence, and groundskeeping had been delayed. The hidden compartment had been built during his father's era, when security was less sophisticated. "And when I looked inside," Madison's voice filled with innocent wonder, "there were bags, and bags of money. More money than I've ever seen in my whole life." She paused, her small face growing concerned. "But sir, I was really hoping to find some leftover food. Do you maybe have any scraps? The kitty is so hungry, and my tummy has been making loud noises all day." The word struck William like physical blows. Here was a child who had discovered evidence that could destroy him, and all she wanted was food scraps. You found money in my backyard," William managed to say, his throat tight. "Oh yes, sir. Lots and lots in big canvas bags. But I don't understand why someone would hide money instead of food." Madison tilted her head thoughtfully. "My mummy says rich people throw away perfectly good food sometimes. I was hoping you might be the sharing kind." William felt the world spinning around him. This innocent child held his family's destruction in her tiny hands, and she had no idea. One conversation with the wrong adult, one innocent mention at school, and everything would unravel. But looking into Madison's trusting face, William experienced something he hadn't felt in years: genuine shame. Not fear of consequences, but actual remorse for the path his life had taken. "Madison," William said slowly, "can you show me exactly where you found this money?" "Of course," Madison brightened immediately. "But first, do you think you might have some food to share? Even just a little bit, Mrs. Jen tried to give me half her rice, but she's hungry too, and it wouldn't be fair to take food from hungry people." Mrs. Abbott, who had been listening from the doorway with growing concern, stepped forward. "Mr. Harrison, perhaps the child would like some lunch. We certainly have plenty." William nodded automatically. Yes, of course." "Madison, would you like to eat something?" Madison's entire face transformed with joy, so pure it was almost painful to witness. "Really? You would share your food with a stranger?" "You're not a stranger anymore," William heard himself say. "You're my guest." As Mrs. Abbott led Madison toward the kitchen, the little girl turned back with a smile that could have melted steel. "Thank you, sir. You're very kind. After I eat, I'll show you exactly where I found all that money. Someone must have lost it, and that would be so sad. Lost it. If only the truth were that innocent." 30 minutes later, William stood in the damaged section of his property with Marcus Webb, staring at the exposed compartment that had hidden his family's darkest secrets for over 2 decades. The space looked exactly as Madison had described, loose bricks creating an opening just large enough for a small child to squeeze through, money bags visible and partially opened. "How much does she know?" Marcus asked grimly, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Nothing beyond what she sees," William said, studying the evidence of Madison's innocent exploration. "She thinks someone accidentally lost it." "Boss, you realize what this means. We can't let word of this spread. One mention to a teacher, a neighbor, anyone. She's 5 years old, Marcus. William's voice carried a warning edge. A hungry 5-year-old who came here looking for food scraps. Which makes this even more dangerous. Kids that age don't understand consequences. They talk to everyone. Marcus ran his hands through his hair. William, be realistic. If this gets out, we're not just talking about prison. We're talking about federal charges, RICO prosecution, the complete destruction of everything your family built. William stared at the money that represented his father's legacy of corruption. Harrison Industries had been built on land, acquired through bribes, contracts won through political manipulation, and communities destroyed through calculated greed. William had inherited it all at 25. The business, the wealth, and the terrible knowledge of how it was all obtained. For 10 years, he'd told himself he was just protecting his family's reputation. He'd maintained the cover-ups, moved the evidence when necessary, and lived with the weight of secrets that weren't originally his to bear. But Madison's innocent discovery was forcing him to confront a truth he'd avoided for a decade. He'd become complicit in crimes that had destroyed lives. "What do you want to do?" Marcus asked finally. William was quiet for a long moment, listening to the distant sound of Madison's laughter from the kitchen. When had he last heard genuine laughter in this house? "I want to know about her family," William said finally, "about her mother, about why a 5-year-old is searching through wealthy neighborhoods for food." "William, find out everything, Marcus, but carefully. And I want to be absolutely clear about this. No one threatens this child or her family. No intimidation, no pressure, nothing that could cause them harm." Marcus studied his employer with growing concern. In 10 years of handling the Harrison family secrets, he'd never seen William show this kind of, what was it, conscience. "What about tonight's operation?" William looked at the exposed money, then back toward the house where Madison was probably experiencing the first full meal she'd had in days. "Postpone it. We need to understand the full situation before we make any irreversible decisions." Inside the mansion's kitchen, Madison was indeed experiencing wonder beyond her comprehension. Mrs. Abbott had prepared what seemed like a feast: grilled cheese sandwiches cut into perfect triangles, tomato soup that was actually warm, fresh fruit, and chocolate milk that tasted like heaven. "Is this really all for me?" Madison asked for the 4th time, her voice filled with disbelief. "Every bit of it, dear," Mrs. Abbott assured her gently. The housekeeper had worked for wealthy families for 30 years, but she'd never encountered a child so overwhelmed by basic food. "And there's more if you're still hungry." Madison ate slowly, clearly trying to make each bite last. She even saved part of her sandwich, carefully wrapping it in a napkin. "For later," she explained to Mrs. Abbott, "and maybe the kitty would like some too." The grey cat had been given his own bowl of tuna and was purring contentedly under the table, but Madison's instinct to save food spoke to a level of food insecurity that broke Mrs. Abbott's heart. "Madison, dear," Mrs. Abbott said gently, "tell me about your mama. Does she work nearby?" Madison's face grew serious. "Mommy works 3 different jobs because we don't have very much money. She cleans offices at night and answers phones at a car place during the day and serves food at a restaurant on weekends." 3 jobs? Mrs. Abbott couldn't hide her shock. "She gets very tired, but she says that's what mamas do. They work hard to take care of their babies." Madison's voice carried a wisdom far beyond her years. "Sometimes there's no money for food, but Mommy always makes sure I eat something, even if she doesn't." Mrs. Abbott felt tears threatening. This child's mother was working herself to exhaustion and still couldn't provide regular meals for her daughter. "Madison," Mrs. Abbott said carefully, "what would you think if someone wanted to help your mama, so she didn't have to work so many jobs?" Madison considered this seriously. "I think Mommy would cry happy tears. But she always says we can't take money from strangers because we don't know if they're good people or bad people. Your mama is very wise." But what if the stranger became a friend first? Before Madison could answer, William appeared in the kitchen doorway. He'd been standing there for several minutes, listening to Madison's innocent description of her family's struggles and feeling something crack open inside his chest. "Madison," William said gently, "how are you feeling? Better?" "Oh, yes, sir. This is the most wonderful food I've ever had." Madison beamed at him with pure gratitude. "Thank you so much for sharing. Mommy always says that sharing food is one of the kindest things people can do." William pulled out a chair and sat across from Madison at the kitchen island, studying her small, earnest face. "Tell me more about your mommy, Madison." For the next 20 minutes, Madison painted a picture of a woman who embodied everything William had forgotten about human decency. Rebecca Parker worked 3 jobs, sacrificed her own needs for her daughters, and somehow managed to raise a child filled with love and optimism despite their desperate circumstances. "Mommy says that being poor doesn't mean being sad," Madison explained, "because we have each other, and love is the most important thing." "Your mama sounds like a very special person," William said, his voice softer than Mrs. Abbott had ever heard it. "She is, but I wish she didn't have to work so much. Sometimes she falls asleep while she's reading to me because she's so tired." William felt something fundamental shifting inside him. For 10 years, he'd lived with the weight of his father's crimes, telling himself there was no way to undo the damage that had been done. But sitting across from this innocent child, he began to see a different possibility. What if redemption wasn't about hiding the past, but about making amends for it? "Madison," William said carefully, "what would you think if I told you that I wanted to be friends with you and your mama?" Madison's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Really? You'd want to be our friend? I would be honored to be your friend. That would be wonderful. Mommy doesn't have very many friends because she's always working, and I think you might be lonely too." The simple observation hit William like a revelation. When had he last had a genuine friendship? When had anyone wanted to spend time with him for reasons that had nothing to do with money or business? "Why do you think I'm lonely, Madison?" "Because your house is very big and beautiful, but it feels quiet. Not like our apartment. Our apartment is small and sometimes cold, but it's full of love and talking and laughing." William looked around his pristine kitchen, marble counters, professional appliances, everything perfect and sterile. Madison was right. His house was a monument to wealth, but it had never been a home. "Madison," William said, making a decision that would change everything, "I think I'd like to learn about having a home filled with love and laughter. Would you and your mama be willing to teach me?" Madison clapped her hands together with delight. "Oh, yes, and maybe the kitty could help too." As William looked into Madison's trusting eyes, he realized that this child had given him something more valuable than all his inherited wealth. The chance to become the man he should have been all along. But first, he had to figure out how to tell Rebecca Parker that her daughter had stumbled onto evidence of massive criminal conspiracy, and that the man responsible wanted to transform his life by making amends to everyone he'd wronged. Starting with the family of a little girl who had come looking for food scraps and found the possibility of redemption instead. By evening, William Harrison's carefully constructed world was unraveling in the most unexpected way. What had begun as crisis management for a potential security breach had evolved into something that challenged everything he believed about power, wealth, and moral responsibility. Sitting in his study, reviewing the information Marcus had discreetly gathered about the Parker family, William felt a growing sense of shame that had nothing to do with fear of exposure and everything to do with genuine regret. The report painted a devastating picture. Rebecca Parker, 28 years old, had been struggling alone for 2 years since her husband's death in a construction accident. James Parker had been working on the Riverside Renewal Phase 2 project, a recent expansion of the original development that William's father had built through corruption 20 years earlier. The bitter irony wasn't lost on William. The original Riverside project had displaced hundreds of families through fraudulent land acquisitions and bribed city officials. Now, 2 decades later, James Parker had died building luxury apartments on that same tainted ground. Apartments marketed to the wealthy while his own family struggled to afford basic necessities. "The connections go deeper than we thought," Marcus reported, entering the study with additional information. James Parker wasn't just any construction worker. He was a quality inspector who'd been asking questions about some irregularities in the Riverside Phase 2 foundation work. William's blood ran cold. What kind of questions? According to his supervisor, Parker had noticed discrepancies between the architectural plans and the actual construction. He'd requested access to the original land surveys and environmental reports from 20 years ago. The implications were staggering. James Parker hadn't just died in a random accident. He'd died while potentially uncovering evidence of the original Riverside fraud. And now his 5-year-old daughter had literally stumbled onto the money that had paid for those crimes. "Marcus," William said quietly, "what if James Parker's death wasn't accidental?" "That's a very dangerous question to ask. But not an unreasonable one. A quality inspector starts asking about original surveys, and suddenly there's a fatal accident at the construction site." William stood and walked to his window, staring out at the city his family had helped shape through decades of corruption. "We need to know the truth about what happened to James Parker. William, you're talking about opening investigations that could implicate us in what? Murder?" William's voice was sharp. "Marcus, if my father's crimes led to James Parker's death, then Madison isn't just an innocent child who found our evidence. She's the daughter of a man who died because of our family's corruption." The weight of that realization settled over the room like a physical presence. William had inherited his father's empire, his father's money, and apparently his father's victims as well. "What do you want to do?" Marcus asked carefully. "I want to meet Rebecca Parker tonight, and I want her to know the truth about everything. Her husband's death, the money Madison found, all of it. That's suicide, William. Complete legal and financial suicide. Maybe. Or maybe it's the only way to finally be free of this." William turned from the window, his face showing a resolve Marcus had never seen before. "I've spent 10 years maintaining my father's lies. I'm tired of being the keeper of secrets that aren't even mine." Meanwhile, across town, Rebecca Parker was facing her own crisis. She'd returned home from work to find Mrs. Chen waiting with a story that seemed too incredible to believe. "You're Madison, Mrs." Chen said, her eyes bright with excitement and worry. "She has big adventure today with very important man." "What kind of adventure?" Rebecca's exhaustion was immediately replaced by concern. For the next 20 minutes, Mrs. Chen described Madison's discovery with the careful detail of someone who understood the potential implications. Madison had found money, lots of money, in the backyard of the Harrison mansion, and the powerful CEO had personally fed her lunch and seemed genuinely concerned about her welfare. "Mrs. Chen," Rebecca said carefully, "are you absolutely certain about this? Rich people don't invite poor children into their homes for lunch. Something about this doesn't make sense." "I know how it sounds," Mrs. Chen admitted, "but Madison, she's special child. She touched people's hearts in ways that surprise everyone." Rebecca felt a chill of worry. Her daughter's innocent charm was both a blessing and a potential danger. If Madison had truly discovered something significant at the Harrison property, "Where is Madison now?" Rebecca asked. "She's sleeping, very tired from big day." "But Rebecca," Mrs. Chen's voice grew serious, "I think maybe this not coincidence. Maybe little Madison finds something very important." That night, Rebecca sat beside Madison's sleeping form, watching her daughter's peaceful face and feeling more helpless than she had since James's death. Her 5-year-old had somehow become entangled with the most powerful man in the city, and Rebecca had no idea whether that was a blessing or a threat. "Mommy!" Madison's sleepy voice interrupted her thoughts. "I'm here, baby. How are you feeling?" Madison sat up, rubbing her eyes. "I had the most wonderful dream about Mr. Harrison and the kitty, and lots of food." "Madison, sweetie, I need you to tell me exactly what happened today at the big house." For the next hour, Madison recounted her adventure with the innocent detail of a child who didn't understand the adult implications of what she'd discovered. She described finding the money, meeting William Harrison, eating the best meal of her life, and making a new friend who seemed sad and lonely despite having everything. "Mommy," Madison said thoughtfully, "do you think Mr. Harrison might need help?" "What kind of help, baby?" "Well, he has so much money and such a big house, but I think he doesn't have very many friends. And he seemed very worried about the money I found, like maybe he was in some kind of trouble." Rebecca's heart clenched. Even at 5 years old, Madison could sense emotional undercurrents that adults tried to hide. "Madison, did Mr. Harrison ask you to keep the money a secret?" "No, Mommy. He just asked me to show him where I found it, and I said I would tomorrow. I think he wants to help find whoever lost it." Rebecca felt a moment of relief. If Harrison had been trying to manipulate or silence Madison, surely he would have sworn her to secrecy. But the fact that he wanted to see the evidence himself suggested. What? That he was as surprised by Madison's discovery as everyone else? A knock at their apartment door interrupted Rebecca's thoughts. It was nearly 9 p.m., far too late for casual visitors. Rebecca peered through the peephole and felt her heart stop. A man in an expensive suit stood in the hallway, his posture confident but not threatening. Even through the distorted view of the peephole, Rebecca recognized him from newspaper photos and television interviews. William Harrison was standing at her door. "Mommy, who is it?" Madison called from the bed. "Stay right there, baby," Rebecca said, her voice carefully calm. She opened the door with the chain still attached. "Mr. Harrison?" "Ms. Parker, I apologize for the late hour, but I need to speak with you urgently about Madison's discovery today. May I come in?" Rebecca studied his face through the narrow opening. He looked tired and somehow smaller than she'd expected. Not the intimidating billionaire from media appearances, but a man who seemed to be carrying a heavy burden. "It's very late, and Madison is about to sleep." "Please," William said, and something in his voice made Rebecca pause. "It's about your husband, James, about how he died." Rebecca's blood turned to ice. She unlatched the chain and opened the door fully, her mind racing with terrible possibilities. William entered their small apartment and immediately looked uncomfortable, not with disdain, but with what appeared to be shame. His expensive clothes and polished appearance seemed grotesquely out of place in their humble home. "Mr. Harrison!" Madison called from the bed, her face lighting up with genuine joy. "You came to visit." "Hello, Madison," William said, his voice gentling automatically. "I hope you enjoyed your lunch today." "It was the best lunch ever. Did you come to meet my mommy?" "I did. I wanted to talk to both of you about something very important." Rebecca gestured toward their makeshift seating area, the broken chair and a spot on the mattress. William chose to remain standing, perhaps recognizing that his presence already filled their small space. "Ms. Parker," William began, "what I'm about to tell you will be difficult to hear, but you deserve to know the truth about your husband's death and about what Madison discovered today." Rebecca felt her knees weaken. "What about James?" "The money Madison found, $10 million in cash. It's evidence of crimes my family committed over the past 20 years. Bribery, fraud, illegal land acquisitions that destroyed communities and displaced hundreds of families. Madison was listening with wide eyes, not understanding the words, but sensing the gravity of the adult conversation. "I don't understand," Rebecca said. "What does that have to do with James?" William took a deep breath. James was working as a quality inspector on the Riverside Renewal Phase 2 project. According to his supervisor, he'd been asking questions about irregularities in the construction. Specifically, he'd requested access to the original land surveys and environmental reports from the first Riverside development. Rebecca's hand went to her throat. The project where he died. Yes. And those original documents would have revealed evidence of the fraud my father committed 20 years ago. William's voice grew heavy. "I believe James was killed because he was getting too close to discovering crimes that could have destroyed my family's empire." The words hit Rebecca like physical blows. "You're saying James was murdered?" "I don't know for certain, but the timing of his accident, combined with the questions he was asking, I think it's possible." Rebecca sank onto the mattress, her legs no longer able to support her. Madison immediately crawled over and put her small arms around her mother, sensing distress even if she didn't understand the cause. "Why are you telling me this?" Rebecca whispered. "Because Madison's discovery has forced me to confront the truth about what my family has done, and because—" William paused, looking at Madison's innocent face. "Because I want to make amends for crimes that should never have been committed." "What kind of amends?" "The money Madison found, plus everything else I can liquidate, I want to turn it into a foundation that helps families like yours. Families who've suffered because of my family's greed." Rebecca stared at him, not comprehending. "You want to give away your money?" "I want to give back money that was never rightfully mine. And I want to make sure that James's death, if it wasn't accidental, leads to justice rather than continued cover-ups." Madison, who had been listening quietly, suddenly spoke up. "Mr. Harrison, are you sad because someone was mean to my daddy?" William knelt down to Madison's level, his expensive suit forgotten. "Yes, Madison. I'm very sad about what happened to your daddy, and I want to make sure that bad things don't happen to good families anymore." "That's very nice of you," Madison said seriously. "Daddy would like that. He always said that people should help each other." Looking into Madison's trusting eyes, William felt the last of his resistance crumble. For 10 years, he told himself he was protecting his family's legacy. But what legacy was worth the suffering of innocent children like Madison? "Rebecca," William said, his voice stronger now, "I know this is overwhelming, but I want you to know that Madison isn't in any danger from me. Just the opposite. I want to make sure she never has to search for food scraps again." "This is too much," Rebecca said, tears flowing freely now. "It's like something from a movie." "No," William said gently. "It's justice, finally." As Madison curled up between her mother and their unexpected visitor, she felt something she'd never experienced before, the sense that her small family was about to become part of something bigger and better. And William Harrison, for the first time in his adult life, understood what it felt like to make a decision based on love rather than fear. Tomorrow, everything would change. But tonight, in a cramped apartment filled with more genuine warmth than his mansion had ever contained, William began to understand what true wealth really meant. The next morning brought an autumn rain that seemed to wash the city clean, and with it a day that would transform multiple lives forever. William Harrison sat in his study at 6 a.m., surrounded by legal documents, financial statements, and a confession letter that had taken him 3 attempts to write. Today, he would walk into the offices of the FBI and district attorney with evidence that would dismantle his family's empire. But first, he had one more conversation to have with the family that had unknowingly become the catalyst for his redemption. At 8 a.m. sharp, Rebecca Parker opened her apartment door to find William Harrison standing in the hallway, looking remarkably different than the powerful executive who had visited the night before. He wore a simple dark suit rather than his usual designer attire, and his face carried a peace she hadn't seen in their previous encounters. "Good morning, Rebecca, Madison. I hope I'm not too early." Madison bounded to the door with the enthusiasm only a 5-year-old could muster. "Mr. Harrison, did you come to have breakfast with us?" William smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his entire face. "Actually, Madison, I was hoping you and your mama might come have breakfast with me. There are some people I'd like you to meet." An hour later, Rebecca found herself sitting in the conference room of Harrison Industries, still struggling to process the surreal nature of her situation. Madison sat beside her, swinging her legs from a chair that was clearly designed for adults, while the grey cat, now officially named Lucky at Madison's insistence, explored his new carrier. Around the conference table sat an impressive array of people: William's attorney, a representative from the FBI's white-collar crime division, a victims' rights advocate, and a woman William had introduced as Dr. Sarah Martinez, who would be heading the foundation William planned to establish. "Before we begin," William said, his voice carrying none of the authoritative tone Rebecca had expected, "I want everyone to understand that this meeting is about making amends, not managing damage. Madison and Rebecca Parker are not problems to be solved. They're the reason I'm finally doing what should have been done years ago." Agent Thompson, the FBI representative, leaned forward. "Mr. Harrison, you understand that what you're proposing, full cooperation and confession to decades of financial crimes, will likely result in significant prison time?" "I understand," William said calmly, "and I accept those consequences." "Why now?" Dr. Martinez asked. "What changed?" William looked at Madison, who was listening with the serious expression she reserved for important adult conversations. "Madison, would you like to tell everyone about why you were in my backyard yesterday?" Madison nodded solemnly. "I was looking for food because my tummy was very hungry, and Mrs. Chen was hungry too. Sometimes we don't have enough food, so we look for scraps that rich people throw away." The simple honesty of her statement created a profound silence in the room. Here was a child who had uncovered evidence of massive financial crimes, not through investigation or malice, but through the desperate search for basic survival needs. "And when you found the money," William continued gently, "what did you think?" "I thought someone must have lost it, and that would be very sad. But I was hoping to find food instead." Madison looked around the table with innocent confusion. "I don't understand why people hide money when there are hungry children who need food." Agent Thompson cleared his throat. "The money Madison discovered represents evidence of bribery and fraud dating back over 20 years. Mr. Harrison, can you explain how your family acquired these funds?" For the next 2 hours, William methodically detailed his father's crimes and his own complicity in maintaining the cover-ups. He explained the original Riverside development fraud, the displaced families who had never received compensation, and the web of corruption that had built the Harrison fortune. Most importantly, he revealed his growing suspicion about James Parker's death. "James Parker was asking the right questions," William said. Questions about foundation discrepancies, environmental reports, original land surveys. If he had gained access to those documents, he would have discovered evidence of the original fraud. Rebecca, who had been silent throughout most of the meeting, finally spoke. "You really think James was killed to protect your family's secrets?" "I think it's possible, and I think you deserve to know the truth, whatever it is." Agent Thompson made notes. "We'll reopen the investigation into James Parker's death." If there's evidence of foul play connected to the cover-up, we'll pursue it aggressively. Dr. Martinez addressed Rebecca directly. The foundation, Mr. Harrison is proposing, would provide immediate assistance to families like yours, plus long-term support for community development in areas affected by the original displacement. You and Madison would qualify for comprehensive assistance, housing, education, healthcare, everything needed for a fresh start. How much assistance? Rebecca asked, still struggling to believe any of this was real. Enough to buy a home in a safe neighborhood with good schools, William said. Enough to pay for Madison's education through college. Enough for you to pursue your own education or career goals without worrying about basic survival. Madison, who had been following the conversation with remarkable attention for a 5-year-old, suddenly spoke up. Mr. Harrison, if you give away all your money to help people, will you have enough for food? The question brought smiles to several faces around the table, but William answered with complete seriousness. I'll have enough, Madison, more than enough, and I'll have something even more valuable. What's that? Friends like you and your mama, and the chance to sleep at night knowing I'm finally doing the right thing. Madison nodded, as if this made perfect sense. That's good. Mummy always says that doing the right thing is more important than having lots of money. Your mama is very wise. The meeting continued for another hour, working out legal details and timelines. William would surrender himself to federal authorities the following Monday. The foundation would be established immediately, with Dr. Martinez overseeing distribution of funds to affected families. Rebecca and Madison would receive immediate housing assistance and long-term financial support. But the most important agreement was simpler than any legal document. William Harrison had found his way back to basic human decency, and Madison Parker had gained a friend who would ensure she never went hungry again. 6 months later, Madison stood in the kitchen of their new house, a modest but beautiful home in a neighborhood where children played safely in tree-lined streets. She was making pancakes for her mother, who was now enrolled in nursing school and volunteering at Madison's elementary school. Lucky the cat sat by the window, watching birds and growing fat on regular meals and abundant love. The refrigerator displayed Madison's artwork, honor roll certificates, and a newspaper clipping with the headline, "Former CEO receives reduced sentence for cooperation in major fraud case. Harrison Foundation distributes $47 million to affected families." William Harrison was serving 18 months in minimum security federal prison, a sentence reduced because of his complete cooperation and the establishment of the foundation. He wrote letters to Madison every week, and she dictated responses that Rebecca carefully transcribed. "Mommy," Madison called from the kitchen, "when Mr. Harrison comes home from his time out, can we have a big dinner party?" "Of course, baby. He'll always be welcome here." "Good," Madison said seriously, flipping a pancake with the concentration of a surgeon. "Because I think he's still learning how to be rich the right way. And everyone needs friends to help them learn important things." Rebecca smiled, setting down her textbook. Through the window, she could see children playing in their backyard garden, Madison and 3 neighbor children, sharing toys and snacks with the unconscious generosity that came naturally to those who understood both want and abundance. "Madison," Rebecca said, "do you remember being hungry?" Madison considered this thoughtfully. "A little bit. But mostly, I remember that even when we didn't have food, we always had love. And now we have both. What do you think Daddy would say about everything that's happened?" Madison's face grew serious. "I think Daddy would be proud that his questions helped other people. And I think he'd like Mr. Harrison now that Mr. Harrison remembered how to be good." Outside their window, the morning sun rose over a city where powerful men were learning to be held accountable, where foundations built on corruption were being transformed into engines of justice, and where a 5-year-old girl's search for food scraps had revealed the most valuable treasure of all. the possibility of redemption for anyone willing to choose love over fear. In her weekly letter to William, dictated with the careful consideration she gave all important communications, Madison had written, "Dear Mr. Harrison, I hope you are learning lots of good things in your time out place. When you come home, we will teach you how to make pancakes and how to play games that don't cost money but are very fun. Lucky the cat misses you and saves the sunny spot on the couch for when you visit. Remember that having enough is better than having everything, and having friends is the best treasure of all." At the bottom, in her own careful handwriting, she had added, "Love, Madison, and Mama, and Lucky." Because sometimes the most profound truths come from the smallest voices, and the greatest wealth is measured not in what we accumulate, but in what we're willing to share.